All right, hey everyone. We are the Mental Barbell, your go-to resource for everything mental performance. We're here to talk about sports psychology, and everything in between. Welcome to the ultimate mental performance journey. Welcome to the Mental Barbell. My name is Ian Reardon, and my guest host today is Matt Rieger of Advanced Therapy and Performance. Hey Matt, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
Awesome. I'm doing very well. Just enjoying, fall sports as seasons start to kick off. Football's starting to go. Keeping a close eye on baseball, but things are exciting in the sports world. Fall's always a good time for some good sport.
For sure.
Yeah. So I thank you for joining us today. Matt and I, for those that don't know, which I assume is a lot of you, we went to school together back at Springfield College, studied together for a year. Matt was a year under me, took over for me in the sport injury rehab clinic as the head kind of point person there. And obviously, being the head of mental training at Advanced Therapy and Performance, you've done some great things. So maybe you could just kind of talk about where you went after our master's degree and kind of what you're doing now.
Yeah. So graduated at a sarcastically great time of May of 2020. So a lot of stuff was shut down and definitely made it difficult in terms of finding what to do with most of the world shut down at that time. And I think it's a testament of like getting to where I am now at ATP was really like building like connections that you had and not um, staying up with the connections that you have. I got here because a coach that I saw at a conference that I didn't talk to in probably like 7 years since like my playing days. Saw him at a conference, we reconnected, talked about a little bit what I was going to school for, and he's like, "Hey, if you ever need anything, like reach out." So as graduation's coming, reached out and said, "Hey, this is what I'm trying to do. I have kind of a strength background as well because I got my personal training certification." And he connected me with Advanced Therapy and Performance and did their internship for 10 weeks, which was a like strength-based one, and then pitched the idea of you have like the physical therapists, you have that side, the training side. Um, this is another big part of baseball because it's primarily a baseball company, of having the mental side. All pro teams have it. So for the past 4.5, almost 5 years now, it's been building like the mental performance division pillar of the company, which has been a lot of ups and downs, a lot of learning for sure. Kind of get thrown into the fire of learning of like book knowledge from classes to like, okay, now like create it and actually apply it and sell it, which has been a long journey for sure.
Yeah, and I think you're one of the few people that we graduated with that has gone on to really integrate yourself into a really holistic program. It is the strength and physical rehab side, but you're also then doing the mental performance side of things. Which thinking back to our time at Springfield, that was kind of the goal. That was what we were shooting for. So. As congratulations on getting that situation set up. I think it's really fantastic. And I think you're kind of on the cutting edge of this kind of mental performance consulting, coaching, being integrated into sports facilities. I think back to kind of the 80s and the 90s where strength training wasn't really a focus, and now every high school in the country essentially has a strength program. And I really see kind of the model that you've struck, and kind of that path being one that others can follow in. So, I'm curious, just personally, what does your day to day look like? When you're working in the clinic.
Yeah, so within it, primarily, like I said, it's going to be the strength training side. So I'm going to say it's not going to be a cookie cutter day where you walk in and have this like set schedule. Like there's a lot of downtime is the wrong word, but time to be able to go and build rapport. Like athletes are going to be here from 10:30 to sometimes 8, 9 o'clock at night, depending on time of the season. Obviously, like during like in season when they have school, then practice is going to be later. Summer's going to be a little bit earlier. But it's a lot of rapport building for sure. And that was a lot of the start of being here, was being on the floor, being able to have that like in between conversation of it's not a hey, how's it going and leave, but not like a 15-minute conversation, but that in between like, hey, can I get to know someone and 30 seconds to a minute, and then over the week kind of build up those small conversations. So that's a big part of it. And then it is also going, about a year ago, we started tracking kind of the progress that athletes have been making. So we created what we call like a results coordinator position as well. So I kind of like do that where we check in with our athletes once a month. So it's just tracking their progress. So checking in how they're doing physically, mentally, how their body's feeling, tracking their progress of their lifts, their different metrics of different exercises, things with baseball performance metrics, and then seeing how they're doing overall, how this program went for them. We set it up once a month because a program for lifting is supposed to be once a month. So it's also building in that accountability of, hey, if we meet in a month, that program should be completed in that time to then have them check in and see, and then set some goals along the way for the next program they have coming. So that fills a decent amount of the schedule because you have a good amount of athletes that we're trying to go and check in with. And then on top of that, it's also doing one-on-one sessions where we dive more into like the mental aspect. Obviously, consistency and goal setting are mental performance aspects, but we kind of dive more into the stuff of anxiety, self-talk, imagery, relaxation, confidence, and building different routines in those one-on-ones. And they dive a lot deeper into kind of what they're going through, and that's more athlete led in those sessions where the check-ins that we do once a month are much more like not checking boxes, but checking boxes. Hey, like how are you doing physically? How are you doing mentally? How's your program going? If you have anything going on, and then I can help facilitate kind of what resources we have at the company to then be able to get them where they need to go. Is it with our physical therapy staff or rehab staff? Is it with our throwing coordinator? Is it with myself, or just stuff that the strength staff needs to be aware of? So it helps facilitate that. And then also, if it's for myself on the mental side, you can have that direct conversation to schedule a one-on-one session where we dive deeper into some of the topics just discussed. And that's typically like the day within it. Like I said, it's making your own schedule and being productive with those times, and then being able to fill those gaps with then, hey, it's a relationship business. So being able to go and talk with guys on the floor, or girls that are on the floor, and then continue to build those relationships. That's only going to help bring anything more forward.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think you hit on two really important points of kind of our field, and that is the kind of flexibility that we have to have, right? Because working in a professional sports organization or a gym or a rehab facility, time is really valuable. And so being able to, build a relationship, as you said, build some rapport, just, walking to a cafeteria or, spending a few minutes while they're in between lifts, those moments can be really valuable. And it sounds like you capitalize on them really well. And then the other side of it is that more formal, one-on-one session where you can really get deeper into things with an athlete, and they can really lead the conversation where they want to go. So, my hat's off to you. It sounds like you're doing some really good work over there, and I know your athletes are appreciative of the work you're putting in. So, I guess my question, I know I've known you since our master's program, but I guess I'm curious, how you got your start in sports psychology, maybe, where you came from in the sports world, and then how you found your way into mental performance coaching.
Yeah, so I went and I played baseball my whole life. And then I went and was kind of trying to decide of what I wanted to do. I did like a gap year between high school and college to kind of figure that out more because I really wasn't sure. And in that time, I found some like key pieces that I really realized I enjoyed doing, which was I enjoyed like helping people at some capacity. I really liked hearing people's like stories anytime I was at something or someone like dove more into like a personal story, whether it was a lecture or something like that. I like tuned into the story and like hearing those. So combining those, like, okay, what can be a field that does that? So originally I was thinking like psychology, maybe like clinical mental health or mental health realm. And then as I kept digging, that's what I thought I was going to be doing. And then when I mentioned stuff if I still play sports and everything, people kept referencing like Springfield College, ironically, of like what they have. So I went on their website and found athletic counseling, sports psychology. So then I dove even deeper into that field to be like, oh, like this combines two things really well that I'm really interested in. So that kind of continued to go and drive that one of like, hey, like maybe not the clinical side, but more of like the sports and performance side could be a way to kind of combine those two things I enjoy a lot more. And I think the more I've dove into that, and like learned more about it in school, out of school as well afterwards, it definitely led to seeing how this isn't just like sports, it is like a lifestyle that impacts so much more. So I think the more I see the connections there, it makes me even more interested in wanting to like learn more and continue to implement it for myself, as well as seeing how I can help other people in a broad range of performance situations, whether
Hmm.
that's sports, school, family, work, friends. I mean, the game of life, essentially.
Yeah, I love what you said there about, you know, the game of life, right? I think the skills that you acquire and that you build as an athlete, they apply everywhere, right? Like they're really, I mean, psychologically speaking, in my opinion, there's really no difference between getting ready for, a track meet or a job interview. The mental prep is the same. You're still going to have the anxiety, the nerves, and the planning that goes into it and things like that. So, what you said there, it on the surface, it seems like we're very isolated in the kind of the sports performance world, but when you get underneath the surface, you really see that we treat athletes as a person, and for just people that they hold their sports experience so highly, they value it so much that being able to help someone in that realm is really it's a service to that person in general, right? They're going to be more happy, they're going to
Mhm.
be more satisfied with what they're doing when they are enjoying their sport. I think that's really interesting.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, seeing as that I've got you here for some time, I'd love to just talk about some things that are going on in the news, some things that have happened, and kind of get your opinion on them. We had the same educational background, but we've both kind of taken different experiential routes, and so you might have some
Mhm.
some different opinions, different insights that I hadn't thought about. So the first one, it is a little bit of an older story, about a month ago. But it comes out of golf. Hideki Matsuyama had just finished playing in the Olympics, and he was out having a drink with his coach and his caddy, and somebody came up, a Parisian came up and snatched the caddy and the coach's bag, which actually had their passports in it. So Hideki then he was able to travel home, and he had his passport, fortunately. But then a few weeks later, there was the St. Jude Championship where he had to compete without his support staff. So he didn't have a caddy, didn't have a coach, and he's competing for a purse of, I think, $20 million. So there's a lot of things going on there, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of new situations that you hadn't prepared for. In golf especially, they put a lot of the decision making and kind of cognitive load on the caddies and the coaches, just because it's such a long game, a long match, a long weekend. And so being with an unfamiliar caddy without a coach on your sideline, I'd like to hear some of the, maybe if you were working with Hideki, what would be some of the things that you could have kind of prepared him for a situation like this, and then maybe how to overcome this type of situation.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a lot to overcome, especially like you said, you have already the pressure of, like you said, like a big purse of like potentially making a lot of money, and then also just your every day of like, hey, this is the person you've probably built a really good like relationship and friendship with because of how much time you spend together. So I think within that, I think the first, obviously processing, understanding like what just happened, and then I think it's going, it's like, hey, like what role, like having that awareness of what role does my caddy like play for me? Like what are those specific roles they have that they help me on the course do? Because then once you can understand that, you can then obviously not replace, but start seeing how you can now adjust to the situation of, hey, are they the person that I'm talking shots through? Okay, like how do I now talk through shots? Are they the person who I potentially vent or debrief after a bad shot about, like, to like, okay, how can I, what skills can I now use to reset, move on to the next shot? like there's probably a lot of downtime in golf. So who can I talk to while I'm walking between holes? I mean, even the more basic of, hey, they're the ones who carry my clubs. So like, how are my clubs getting from hole to hole? Because probably not wanting to be the person to carry them from an energy standpoint, like you said, of a long game. So I think understanding like what the role, like all of the intricacies of what the caddy brought to your game is a good first step. And then creating some plans of, obviously it's not replacing them, but being able to go and like, okay, how can I now pivot or adjust to these things? Is it going and, hey, there's someone I talk to between hole to hole. Okay, can I go and maybe I'm talking to myself out loud of like what I'm seeing or what I'm experiencing. So you're hearing it, it's not just all in your head. If there is downtime, can you write some of it out on a notepad or whatever you have to then go and kind of express it? Um, like I said, some general answers, but I think that's a good starting point. I'm curious what you have as well. Uh, Within that, as like a thing to understand, like what just took place, and now like how do I move forward from it?
Sure. Yeah, and I think I really like what you said there uh, about how remembering how you communicate with these people, right? Like so, like you said with your caddy, if you're used to talking out loud, through your shots, there is a sense of like what modality are you processing information through? So, like you said, if you start talking to yourself in your head, but you're used to talking out loud, your brain isn't processing through your ears the way that you're used to. So maybe talking out loud might, help you kind of bridge the gap between what you're used to and now the current situation. So I thought that was fantastic. And you know, you focused a lot on the caddy, and I think that's really important because the caddy is the one who's there, with them all the time. And I don't know the specific relationship that Hideki had with his coach, but in my estimation, I would think that he would be able to adjust a little bit less. Do you know what I mean? Like if your coach isn't there, being able to really watch how you're playing and see how things are unfolding, you more have to rely on your game plan. You just you stick with
Yeah.
what you're doing, and there's less ability to be creative just because again that
Mm,
coach isn't there, to not necessarily hold your hand, but to walk you kind of through some of
yeah.
that. Um, I did think it was interesting looking at if you look at their scorecards throughout the week. Matsuyama's last round was by far his worst, and he had Scotty Scheffler kind of coming up had a really good last round, so kind of nipping at his heels. And I'm curious what level of kind of looking over your shoulder there was. A lot of times, I think
Mhm.
caddies and coaches do a good job of just keeping you focused and keeping you kind of moving in a direction and maybe without some of those external reminders, Hideki was a little bit more kind of worried about what was coming behind him. And
Mm.
so I think that's another interesting point of finding ways to again serve the role that your coaches were, that they served, but trying to figure out how to do that for yourself. I think that could be really important.
For sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Another story kind of coming out of your neck of the woods, out of baseball. I think everyone's eyes have been on Shohei Ohtani and the things he's done this season. The 50 home runs, the 50 stolen bases. And I think he's a really interesting athlete to kind of talk about. He's not one that talks a whole lot about mental skills or that he kind of practices these types of things. But what I think just in seeing his interviews, and I know his English is improving, but not perfect. But he's an athlete that just likes to have fun. It seems like his warm up is very lighthearted. He's always kind of laughing and making jokes and kind of giggling his way through interviews. And I think it's a really cool insight into a very specific type of athlete. And that might be just the athlete who just loves to be there and loves to train, likes to just kind of be there and be with his teammates and be doing great things and just kind of having fun. And I'd like to hear maybe your kind of perspective on that type of athlete, one that's not white knuckling their performance, that they have to do something, but that really are out there for kind of the love of the game and the love of the sport.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, coming from a person who's all the publicity from two countries going on, signing arguably like the biggest the biggest contract in MLB history, which not only did the contract bring the news, but also the way the money was distributed brought a lot of news because
Mhm.
He's taken like 2 million a year and then deferred like 68 of it. So then the Dodgers can get more players. So not only did you go to a team that people like are they're spending a lot of money, but also they deferred it to be able to go and have um that ability to now go and sign more players. You had the thing with his translators, like there's a lot of distractions coming up to like that weren't baseball related heading up to this season. And then on top of that, now you have to perform with the pressure of all of this happening. And now it's like, hey, like you got to live up to it. And by the way, you also are coming back off Tommy John. So like you can't pitch, it's just DHing, which in itself is a whole other like mental battle of you are going to be probably performing for I'm going to say maybe like 10 minutes out of the 2.5, 3 hour game,
Mm,
roughly, because you're just hitting. And then if you get on base, it might be a little bit longer, but your at bats aren't going to be super, super long. So to show that value is really tough. And I think what you said is exactly true. Like he's someone who he seems to just enjoy what he's doing. And that just takes a whole weight off of what's going on. The more you're so focused and pressured on the outcome, the results of what you're doing, and not living into that moment to moment and just appreciating it as it comes, plays such a big role when we're so centric or focused on what's going to happen. I think there was a recently, it was there's a photo of I think he hit the game tying home run, and you got to see like Mookie Betts' reaction to him like tying it like on the on deck circle. And I think the then at bat after was Betts, and he walked it off like the next at bat, or it might have been the inverse order. But you got to see like both of their reactions of like two men that are I think Otani is like 29. He might be like 30, and then Betts is like 31, 32, roughly. But you have two guys in their 30s, we'll say, that are just like playing a kid's game and just like enjoying the moment of like a walk-off,
yeah.
like and celebrating in that fun way. And I think that just takes a lot of the weight off of it. It's like, hey, like I'm playing a game, and this could obviously be translated to a lot of things in life, but in that moment, it's like, hey, like the pure joy and excitement. So now it's how can you replicate that? And it typically comes from, hey, can I just like appreciate what I'm doing and enjoy these small moments that might seem insignificant, but can help add to a lot more joy going out and playing it.
Hmm. And so much of what we talk about as mental performance coaches is creating the right environment for performance, right? You can't force performance, but you can create the right situation for a great performance to come about. And like what you said, enjoying those small moments, just kind of smiling when you see a walk-off homer, something like that. I think those it puts you in the right headspace to then perform at your best. Perform with the love of the game in your heart, a smile on your face, and kind of a championship in your eye. But I think that's great, and it really it kind of is the point to what we're going to talk about in a minute, and that is what you should focus on rather than trying to block out distractions. And
Right.
rather than focusing on his contract or focusing on the betting scandal or focusing on his elbow, he's able to just focus on, like you said, Mookie Betts hitting a home run, or just kind of goofing around with his buddies. Another kind of situation that's come up within the last couple of months during the Olympics, that really involved some significant distractions came from the sport of weightlifting. And the situation that I'm particularly thinking about was in the finals of the super heavyweight division, where a lot of the athletes were wearing singlets that had multiple logos on it, which was, I guess, against one of the rules of the Olympic Committee. Obviously, these athletes didn't know about it, but pretty much every athlete you saw going out on the stage to do, a lift for an Olympic medal, they were kind of fidgeting with their uniform or putting tape over a logo or trying to keep, electrical tape from covering up a logo. And so I'd like to hear kind of your perspective on how to, as Otani did or is continuing to do, and how these weightlifters do, try to block out some of those distractions, or maybe kind of what to focus on rather instead of trying to block those things out. And I know you've done a lot of work with your athletes about this, and I'd like to hear some of your kind of expertise.
For sure. Yeah, I think when it's you kind of break distractions like in two ways. Like you have the external ones of outside noise or things around you of your situations, and obviously an internal with your thoughts, feelings, emotions. And I think it's a similar approach. I think they kind of can both distract you. I think when they're external things from you that are outside of you, so in these situations of if it's Otani, like the noise of the media, the things of, like you said, like multiple logos in different settings for high schoolers to make it more applicable. It might be like, hey, is there a scout coming to see you, or like a college, or is your coach watching, friends watching? And I think the term like block it out, or you hear like ignore it, block it out, forget about it seems like it goes and just gives more weight to the actual distraction because you're actively trying to forget something that's physically still going to be there. So something I always try and say to athletes is like, no matter how hard you try and like pretend it's not there, like it is going to be there. So rather than constantly fighting this urge of like, forget about it and giving more focus or headspace to the actual person or thing that's there, like just recognize like like that is there. Like I noticed that this coach, this member, this thing is there because just by noticing it and saying like, hey, like it's there, like it is a thing, we can then go and reduce probably the mental chatter we're having within it because now we're not fighting with the, oh, well, this coach is here, so I got to do this and this and this and this. Like, let's forget about that. Let's go to that. I can now go and say, hey, they're there. And then using the word and to then say, like, hey, there's this scout coming to see me play at this game. And I want to focus on X, whatever that performance cue thought process can be. So now you're dictating your focus or your mental energy, whatever you want to call that, towards a productive thing that you're trying to execute on rather than trying to fight with yourself over the perceived distraction that's taking place.
Mm,
So a lot of that is then coming up with like, okay, it's great to recognize, and I think this is kind of similar with a lot of skills. People think that breathing or some type of thing of getting present with focal cues helps them like focus and lock in, but then once they do it and it might help them for a couple of seconds, their brain's going to go right back to like the same stimulus that was distracting them beforehand. So it's really important to have that thing that centers you. So it could be breathing, it could be a focal point along the way, but you also need to now give your brain a direction to of what to focus on. If you
mm,
don't do that, then the breathing, the focal point, the senses, grounding, whatever you want to do isn't going to be super effective because once you stop doing it, everything is going to come back. So then we want to give our brain or our focus a direction to then actually go on. And then that's where we're lucky, right? We can only focus on one thing at a time. So if we have an active motto, slogan, saying, whatever performance cue to go to, and we can repeat that, now we can give ourselves back to that optimal mental state to perform the task or execution of what you need to do.
mhm. Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I'm thinking back to some of my like child development classes in undergrad, and one of the things they always talk about is that children don't really hear the word no or don't.
Mhm.
So like if you're talking to a kid and you say uh, don't go play with your friends, all they heard was go play with your friends, right?
Yeah.
And I think as adults we can understand that too. If you walk into a room and there's a big red button that says do not push, the urge to push that button is very strong.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to tell your brain not to do something because you're just
Right.
reminding it of what you want to do. Again, try this activity by yourself. Don't think of a pink giraffe. It's like the first thing you think of for the next hour is a pink giraffe. So uh,
Right.
what you're talking about of redirecting your focus rather than trying to block it, I think is great. And I think it also is worth talking about the different kind of multi-layered um, or the multi-layered aspect of attention, right? It's not so much one thing, right? So I'm gonna butcher the name. It's Nideffer. I'll add the some resources down below. But the attention model is kind of four quadrants where you have, as you said, the internal and the external. So the
Yep.
internal distractions versus the crowd noise and the external stuff. But then there's also kind of a wide versus narrow type of focus. And different sports require different types of focus. So a closed skill sport, something like golf, where your opponents don't directly interact with you, right? So the skill is a closed loop. You don't have to adjust to external things. That can necessitate a much more narrow type of focus. Whereas a sport like soccer, that's a much more open skill where there's a lot of things going on, the situation's constantly changing. You might need a more broad external sense of awareness rather than that narrow internal or narrow external
Yeah.
focus. So I say that just to bring up the point that it's not that your focus is wrong. It's just maybe
Right.
you're using the wrong type of attention. And
Right.
so, kind of changing it to that framework, I think it makes it then easier to move from a place of distraction to a place of focus. So, in the situations that we're talking about, let's say you're an Olympic weightlifter and you've got this piece of tape hanging over a logo on your chest. You can think about that, right? That's very narrow external, right? It's an external factor and you're really focusing on that one thing. Or you can kind of redirect into an internal narrow state where you're really preparing for the lift at hand. But it's that transitioning that's easier to do than blocking out. And I think, you
Right.
hit the nail on the head there. Um, it's hard to tell your brain, don't do anything. So uh,
Right.
I guess now that we've covered that, it's hard to block things out. What are some of your recommendations? I know you mentioned breath work and kind of physical grounding, but what are some of the things that you work with your athletes on focusing on, let's say, in a baseball game?
Yeah, it's one of those things where fortunately baseball is one of those games you have a lot of time in between, which can be a good thing or a bad thing,
Yeah.
depending on the person. So you have time to reset and regather and breaks in between. I think one of our pro guys will do like a round table. We're just like discussing topics. And one of them was on like, I know I don't want to bring a whole different topic, but he mentioned the word flow, so I'll use it. And he
Sure.
was saying like it's hard in baseball sometimes to do that. And he put a perfect analogy out. He said like baseball, it's like driving in the city, right? It's stop and start constantly. So there's not this continually flowing of the game like there is if you were like on a highway of different sports. So like we have to be able to be like on off for potentially if you're pitching, it could be like anywhere from 3 to 10 minutes of like constantly switching back and forth. Other sports, you might be able to continuously do it for 30, 40, 50 seconds, or if it's maybe like soccer or something like that, like it's continual gameplay. So it really is honing in on those routines of we know you're not going to be at your optimal like focus, intensity, arousal, activation, whatever word you want to put in their state, but we want to try and get back to that as many times as possible or consistency as possible right before you're about to throw that pitch or swing or play in the field. So it really is trying to build that habit of how can we get you to your optimal state when needed, and then understand that you don't have to be there all the time because that's going to be really hard to do.
Hmm.
So rather than looking at, okay, I have to be on for 2, 3 hours, it's like, no, actually, like you have to really be on for, say, a total of I don't know if you're pitching like 10, 15 minutes, but that means you have to be very conscious of where you are to get back to that optimal state. Maybe if you're a pitcher and you're starting like 100 different times.
Hmm.
So I think that's the part where it allows a lot of freedom of seeing where they need to be. So for a lot of them, find a lot of people tend to have to like bring themselves down a little bit or like relax in bigger moments. So it's okay. Can I recognize the states that I'm in, how my body's doing, breath rate, and everything? How are my thoughts? And then like, okay, where can I get to my ideal? And I think identifying that ideal first is important. So you can always go back to. And that's where I think my set focus for a lot of people is like the first session is going to be understanding what's going on, but then it's also understanding like what is your ideal state because that's what we're always going to be trying to get back to. And once we know that, we have a direction that we can always strive to get back to. Where if it's just like, oh, I'm nervous when this happens, and it's like, okay, we can go and do relaxation techniques. Like, okay, but to what point? Like, what's too much? What's not enough? But if we have
Mm.
that target, almost like when we set goals of like, hey, this is my ideal, then we can always strive for that. And then every session after that is kind of tailored towards that ideal um, that we can then work back to. And then it's also a question of awareness of like, okay, did you get back to it? If not, okay, then we have our answer. If you did, okay, what can we now adjust? Did some new variable come in? So I think that's a big part of how I kind of introduce of like we're going to lay the groundwork of finding that ideal state because you have the time in baseball particularly to be able to, like I said, in between innings, in between pitches, whatever, like regather and now refocus. And now we're going to work on the consistency of doing it to then
Mhm.
be at your best.
Yeah, I think that's great because I do wonder, we often talk about these techniques and, breath work and focus and grounding and kind of all these things to improve your performance, but we don't, maybe this is something that we can work on with our athletes is really finding that place that we need to be. And I think it can change too. I know thinking back to myself
Right.
as an athlete, there would be times where I would really benefit from being kind of laser focused, and then there was other times where I'd benefit more from kind of an Otani, kind of happy,
Yeah.
goofy background. So I think it can change too, depending on the circumstance and where you are in the season. Thinking about a sport like baseball, it really would be hard to be lasered in, focused for that many hours a game, that many games a week, etc. So being able to transition between, internal and external attention, I like the idea of kind of using the repetitive the pitcher's motion as kind of a good reset because it happens, every time and being able to focus in on that. If you're required in the play, maintain that focus. But if you're not required in that play, then you can kind of shut it down until the next
Right.
opportunity. So I think that's really good. And learning how to move seamlessly kind of can help ease that cognitive load too, because you're not trying so hard to focus on one thing,
Right.
rather letting your attention kind of drift.
Yeah, and what typically within it, depending on age groups as well, will vary that approach. Obviously, if it's someone who's in the pros or college and like they really know themselves, we can alter that approach a little bit more. I'm going to say with like more high school and more youth athletes, they probably don't have an exact like routine. So to
Hmm.
start them off, we're going to try and be like, hey, like every single time, like let's do this before every pitch because we want to get them in the habit of doing it. Where we might be a little bit more lenient with like a pro or collegiate athlete if they really know themselves. Um, just because like they have that experience where, like I said, with a high like a younger athlete, they might not have that awareness. So we can kind of start from the ground up of like, hey, like every single time, like let's do this. And then as you get more comfortable and know yourself better, then we can maybe vary that a little bit. But to start, like they're not going to be as great with like the gray area. Like they want like a black or white, like set in stone. Like when this happens, this is what I do.
Right. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's kind of a testament just to the development of through sports. I think when you're starting off, you have so much room for improvement. Just what we call like newbie gains. Doing anything is better than doing nothing, and I think that's a great place to start. And then that person can kind of fine tune their own technique and their own things that make it their own. Over the course of their
Mhm.
career. I
Right.
think it's also interesting to think about. Uh, and this might be sort of a start of a larger conversation, so that we can have another time. But what different levels of athletes need to focus on? So for a youth athlete, they might need to focus on like, all right, when the ball comes to me, I need to put my glove on the ground. I need to scoop the ball rather than try to catch it off the bounce.
Right.
Things like that. But then once you get towards the pros, towards college, then it's much more about your energy level, your concentration, things like that. So the maybe higher order skills start to become more important, right? When you're a kid, you can just do what your coach says, but when you're, as you said, as you get more advanced, you have to start developing your own technique and your own kind of approach.
Yeah. No, I think the biggest thing, especially now with high school athletes, is there's just so much information that they're consuming, and they still don't have, I'll call it like their approach, and I'll put that in
Mm,
like quotes, kind of their own approach of what they want to do. And
mhm.
not saying all pro players have that either, but especially at the high school level, there's just so much information that they have of obviously like statistics. Like, I mean, not gonna say the things, but like the amount of like ranking systems there are for baseball now is just like mind numbing of all these different things of trackers of this, like ranking kids when they're like 10, 11 years old of like, okay, you're a top X player in this region of the country at this age, according to fill
Wow.
in the blank company. Like,
Yeah.
and it's just training them so early to like be so results oriented, so pressure filled, so like it takes the what we talked about Otani, like the fun and joy of it away. And
Hmm.
now it's like I just have to compete. And it also kind of takes away some of like the team aspect of it because it's so individualized that they're so focused on like, oh, what's my ranking? And like the essence of team. So that's where for a lot of kids, like you can go and just get them back to like the really basic things of kind of the whole discussion. Like I said, is what you want to focus on. And like they don't have that answer a lot of times. I've had numerous sessions where I've had a kid talk about their overthinking a lot and their distractions of this, the results, coaches, everything. And they'd go on for it's an hour session for 30, 40, 50 minutes of everything that's not going on in their mind when they're at the plate. It's like, well, how do you perform? And they're like, I don't. Like, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, yeah.
And I remember the first time I asked, like, it wasn't planned. And I just asked a kid, like, what do you just listed out all the things that are to think going on in your head? I was like, what do you want to focus on at the plate? And he was silent. Like he had no words of what he actually wanted to think about actively at the plate.
Mm,
And that kind of led this whole exploration of I don't know if they know because there's just so much information now that they don't have that simplified answer of what I want to do. And for him, literally, and this is, I think, the power of how the mind can impact us. The next game, like he just simplified his approach. He's like, my leg lift does this. He's like, what? I'm just going to tell myself like load and go. Like that's all I'm going to say. And I'm going to repeat it over and over. And like the next game went like 3 for 4. He said my mind was super clear and I was able to just like see the ball and react, like load and
mm,
go. He's like, that's all I did. And it worked so well. And sometimes it's that easy. And it's
hmm.
kind of, it's sad that that's what's happening to a lot of kids, I think, like at least the ones I've been working with, that they just don't know what to actually focus on or think about
Mm.
because there's just so much info. And it
Mhm.
just, that's like a question I now go to so much. Because once again, if you don't know what to focus on, the mind's going to take you to some crazy places.
Yeah, it reminds me, I don't know the truth of this story, but I've heard this story that Albert Einstein was taking a golf lesson once, and the instructors, giving him all the tips, adjust your grip, stand this way, swing your hips through, follow through, keep your eye on the ball. And Einstein at one point tosses a whole bucket of balls at the guy and says, "Here, catch." It's the idea of like you're throwing too many things at me. I
Right,
can't, even Einstein can't think of 42 things at a time. So it's isolating one thing, and even if it's not the right thing, it's just the fact that
right,
you've chosen this thing to focus on. And you know what? If it doesn't work, then pick something else to focus on, right? If
right.
if load and go doesn't work, then think about, baseball is not my wheelhouse,
Yeah,
but pin the bat to your shoulder better, whatever it might be.
right,
Um, but just the act of like taking control of it, I think that's a huge
right,
thing too. A lot of the athletes that I've worked with, they feel almost like they're responding to their own psychology, right? So
yep,
like they get up to the bat and they are distracted, and then now they're like, how do I undistract myself? But it's the idea of being proactive, right? You're putting a
right,
thought in your head, telling yourself to think about this. And I think that's awesome. Those mantras, those are kind of my favorite thing in sports psych to talk about. Those quick, Judy, our mentor, kind of talked about mental choreography. So having like a thought pattern that you repeat
yep,
can be really helpful. It's the same thing, like that mantra, that load and go. It just quiets everything else and gives you that one thing to focus on. Um,
right,
and I really like what you're talking about here and kind of focus on two different sides of it. So focus in the moment, but also like career focus or like
right,
season focus. And I think that's really interesting because I guess I hadn't really thought about kind of concentration or focus in terms of like a season, but I do think that's important. If you've got, you know, opinions coming at you from all angles and you're kind of constantly changing your approach and changing things, you're not really focused on what's going to make you better. You're rather just kind of letting other people dictate how you are. And so having more of that, like that pick something that I'm going to improve on rather than try to improve everything all at once, I think is
Right.
a really good point.
Yeah, and that's the piece of it. Like I love the Einstein example within it because I think we're at the point now, especially with them like athletes are going even at the high school level, like they know so much information. Like they know way more than they think they do.
Hmm.
And that's why I think you're kind of finding more kind of they're still in the realm of like, oh, if I just get stronger, just throw harder, hit harder, or do whatever a little bit better, like I'll be fine.
Hmm.
That's why I'm kind of finding like once people get to like that sophomore, juniorish age of college, they've hit the strength they wanted to get to. They have the technique down, but they still want something more to get
Hmm.
better because it's not there. And that's when they tend to be a lot more bought into the mental side because that's the next thing. Or with
Mm.
high schoolers, a lot of them are like, I'm not as strong as I want to be. I don't have the technique down, which no one does, obviously. Like it's a lifelong endeavor. But
Sure.
in their mind, like that's the answer. So they're not going to the mental side, but they have so much info that it's time to just let your body kind of move because you've been doing it so much. And that's especially like with baseball. So it's such a repetitive sport that there's a reason why different topic, but like you have to take some breaks because it is such a repetitive sport.
Hmm.
So I say like trust your body and your eyes to get you where you want to go. Like your body's going to move in that direction, most likely because you've done it so much. Like let the muscle memory take place. So I used the example of like if they're of driving age, I'll say like when you're driving, like where do you look? And like they're like, I look out. Like, okay. So when you look straight out, you're going in the direction, but you're not thinking about all the little turns, like, but your
Mm.
body's bringing you in that direction. And I was like, what happens if you look down and like you look at the note, like the front of the car? Like what happens? Like you're
Mm.
focusing right in front of you. And like I start to swerve a little bit because you're seeing all the little inconsistencies. You're trying to manually move the car more and it's more clunky. I'm like,
Hmm.
that's what we want to get you to be more of, or we want you to get more like out in front of you, like
Sure.
looking out and trusting your body rather than
Hmm.
the mechanics. So when people say, like, well, what if I'm not doing it right? Or like I have to think about these things a lot more. It's like potentially in practice and things like that. But if we can go and trust the movements and let our eyes naturally direct us where we want to go, we're going to do it 95% pretty well and
Hmm.
actually probably do it better because we're not allowing our brain to actively like take over and like manually clunky do everything.
Sure. Yeah, not to throw out another quote, but and I'm going to butcher this one, but it was something like an impartial plan executed like enthusiastically is better than a perfect plan executed meekly. And that's kind
Right.
of it, right? Like you can sit and plan and write out like every little thing you want to do, or you can say, I'm going to go out and game. I'm just going to go out and play. I
Right.
let the training, I left the training in the training hall, on the practice field. Now it's time to go out and play baseball or go out and weightlift or whatever your sport might be. And I think um, that's a great I think place to end today on, and kind of leaving it at like focus is multidimensional, and
Yep.
different parts of your season, career, game necessitate different types of attention. And
Right.
it's really the more that you can learn to kind of move into different those four quadrants of attention that we talked about, that you can move freely between them, you're going to have more control over yourself as an athlete, and you'll be able to adjust and make adjustments based on your performance rather than those external kind of smorgasbord of information that a lot of
Right.
people are overwhelmed with.
For sure. Absolutely.
Awesome, Matt. Well, I appreciate your expertise. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and all the things you've learned. I appreciate everything you've got to say and things you've got to add. And it sounds like you're doing some really great work over at ATP with your baseball crew.
For sure. Yeah. I appreciate you having me and great conversation, of course.
Awesome, Matt. Well, you have a good one, and until next time here.